My clock is showing 12 p.m., so we'll get started. My name is Whitney Ray. I am a records management analyst at the State Archives, and I am happy to welcome you to the second Lunch and Learn event of this series in celebration of Women's History Month. This is an event produced by the State Archives of North Carolina in partnership with the State Library of North Carolina. After a brief introduction, Kelly Agan will give a presentation on making time for women's history, exploring online collections, resources, and free exhibit tools. If you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A section of this Zoom webinar. We'll also have a number of prompts in the chat, as well as a couple of polls, so you can share your thoughts there. If you'd like, you're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat. Please share your name and a female figure from North Carolina history who has had a significant impact on you, and tell us why. We have two more Lunch and Learn events this month. On March 23rd at noon, please join us for A Viewpoint of Her Own, the Black Mountain College photographs of Helen M. Post. Archivist Sarah Downing will examine the work of photographer Helen M. Post through a collection of images she created at Black Mountain College in 1937. Her photographs are among the most popular materials from the Western Regional Archives, and we're excited to be highlighting her work. On March 30th, we will have a discussion on Reconstruction aids, guided by lead archivist of the Western Regional Archives, Heather South. Reconstruction aides worked in veterans hospitals following World War I. Heather South will discuss the creation of the program and significance of the aides activities in Asheville. Francesca Evans, the community engagement librarian at the State Archive, will share a link for more information and how to register for the upcoming Lunch and Learn events in the chat. Today, I am excited to introduce Kelly Agan. Kelly will be speaking on making time for women's history, exploring online collections, resources, and free exhibit tools. Kelly Agan is currently the Reference Services Supervisor at the Government Heritage Library at the State Library of North Carolina. She has a background in public history and the history of North Carolina and the South, as well as digital humanities. She has been at the State Library for 7 years and has participated in many areas of the library's operations, from digital collection development and web publishing to outreach and education and reference services. She loves to share her enthusiasm for historical research and for connecting people of all ages with resources for learning and exploring wherever their imaginations take them. Again, if you have questions during this presentation, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A section or chat of the Zoom webinar. Without further ado, Kelly Agan, take it away.
Thanks, Whitney. And I am excited to be here today. I am talking to you from downtown Raleigh, where I am hermetically sealed in my office, and I am practicing the 3 W's: wait, wear, and wash. So again, thank you for making time for Women's History today by attending our talk, and especially for sharing your lunch hour with us. I know that those moments away are precious. For the next 40 minutes, I'm going to give you a lightning tour of a variety of websites and resources that you can use to make time for women's history, whether you're working on a special project at work, looking for resources for the classroom, or maybe you're helping kiddos learn from home, or you're researching on your own for the joy of learning. We'll have a special focus on the wealth of resources available for the history of North Carolina's women. And I'll also highlight other collections here and there that we librarians and archivists really consider our go-tos. My goal is to shine a light on the wealth of resources that are out there, whatever your interests and needs. And one note, I'm going to cover a lot of information today. This is really a kind of like a extended lightning talk. And I have included a link to a toolkit with all the resources that I'm talking about and even more, so you don't have to worry about writing things down or screenshots or anything like that. Just sit back, enjoy your lunch, and listen. And so before I start the rapid tour, I also want you to know that every historical image that I have used in this talk has actually come from a North Carolina documentary collection, and most are specifically related to the state's history and heritage as well. The first image on the title slide shows women mending books in Forsyth County circa 1937 to 1941 as part of a Works Progress Administration mending project. And this image comes from the North Carolina Public History files at the State Library of North Carolina. And the image is available in the State Library's online collections. If that sounds like an advertisement, it sort of is, in our North Carolina digital collections online. And I found it through the Digital Public Library of America site. If that all sounds a bit mysterious to you, I'll be sharing more on that in a bit. So I always say so much to discover, so little time. Because we can't really do it justice in a short talk. But in the next few minutes, I'm going to cover a broad range of go-tos to get you into women's historical resources online. One of my goals is to give you an insider view, if you're not from the library and archives world, of how the world of resources is structured and how we as librarians tend to keep looking for information in the nooks and crannies of the web in particular, since we're really talking about online resources today. It's an ongoing process. We're never done learning that, and there's no single place to look, and there's no single source, and collections and content are always changing. So with that in mind, I'm going to cover secondary source content to learn at any time from anywhere, resources for classrooms and learning from home, how to make it real with primary sources, because that's what lends the richness and the reality to stories. It's where the stories come from, and some resources to get creative for free, or disclaimer, mostly for free, and with very few technical skills. Pardon me. It is allergy season in North Carolina, so I may cough a little bit here and there. And then at the end, we'll open it up to get your questions and experiences and ideas. So I wanted to share that, oh, pardon me, whoops. I did want to say something about the image in this slide as well, because the images that I've used throughout are kind of signposts for a number of ideas about libraries and archives. And I wanted to really highlight this image. It shows the cover of a North Carolina Department of Administration and North Carolina Council for Women publication from 1991 to 1992, and it was created for Women's History Month. This is a state government document, and I especially love this item because it illustrates that government documents can be just as interesting in historical information, artifactual evidence as any historical photograph. They're not always, sort of dry government reports and things like that. There's just a range to state publications and state documents that really make them a rich resource, for learning. And this image comes from the State Documents collection of the State Library. Again, it's online in our North Carolina digital collections, and I found it through the Digital Public Library of America. So a theme will emerge there that will be revealed. Oops, I am so sorry. My hands and my mouse are not in sync today. So we have another poll. And we'd like to ask you, what was the last online resource or website that you used to find credible information? And you can share that in the chat as well. So the question is, what is out there for credible secondary source learning content for women's history? And that's a really good question, because I think people often struggle with this when they're looking to find information and to know, is this credible? Is this vetted information? And the good news is that there's a world of it out there, and there's almost more than a person can sort of grasp. And this content, secondary content, includes encyclopedias, it includes blogs, it includes LAM's websites, and LAM stands for Libraries, Archives, and Museums, as well as research guides that have been compiled by your friendly neighborhood librarian. And these are some really well-developed standard places to look for credible information. And as librarians and archivists, we look at these all the time. And by the way, speaking of your friendly neighborhood librarian, this image shows a Pender County bookmobile circa the 1950s, and it's parked in front of a private home. I personally love the thought that librarians made house calls. And I suppose that thanks to the internet, that's what we're doing again. And again, this image comes from the Public Library History Files of the State Library. It's in the North Carolina Digital Collections, and I found it again through the Digital Public Library of America. So what about online encyclopedias? We hear a lot about Wikipedia, for example, as something that is not recommended for students, for example, school-age students to use for research. But apart from Wikipedia, there are actually a wealth of online encyclopedias out there. Some of them are subscription-based, but the resources that I'm talking about today are all freely available. And I think that many people have forgotten about the value of finding credible information in encyclopedias. I think Google search has sort of, it's far too tempting for people to take the top of the search results. And Wikipedia is in fact not the only online encyclopedia. In fact, there are now about 25 or so state encyclopedias online. Most are free and freely accessible, and they're typically coordinated by state historical societies, universities, and humanities councils. And there are also a few specialized encyclopedias that I've come across, including the Encyclopedia of Greater Philadelphia, the Encyclopedia of Cleveland History, just to show you, city and town level encyclopedias that have rich information. They're very well put together, as well as the Encyclopedia of Jewish Women, apropos for our study of women's history. State encyclopedias include a number of representatives that are important for North Carolina's historical connections and historical migration patterns as well. These include Georgia, Tennessee, Virginia, South Carolina, West Virginia, Alabama, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Texas, among others. Another go-to encyclopedia for me is called blackpast.org. This is an online encyclopedia that presents historical and biographical entries from both the American historical experience as well as the global African experience. Numerous people, events, and connections to North Carolina are included, and it is highly searchable. And that's something else that you'll hear me say throughout the talk today about the searchability of websites. That is increasing all the time, and many of the websites that are my go-tos are highly searchable, and you can search by keyword the same way that you would on the internet. So another quick poll. Have you ever used Ncpedia, North Carolina's online encyclopedia? And feel free again to put your answers in the chat. Ncpedia is North Carolina's online encyclopedia. It's coordinated here at the State Library, and it dates back to the early days of the web and frequently asked questions that reference librarians would get over the phone or from walk-in visitors. Today, the resource has more than 8,400 entries and more than 9,000 images included. Content includes more than 3,500 biographies, entries on counties and county history, state symbols, geography, environment, climate and places, wildlife and nature, North Carolina quick facts, settlement history, daily life and social history, government and politics, business history. I could go on all day. Education, arts and culture, maps, and more. And of course, there is women's history. Ncpedia has a landing page specifically for North Carolina women's history, and that's what you see in front of you on the slide. This page brings together a number of subtopics for women's history to give a broad overview of some of this key content that Ncpedia contains, as well as to facilitate browsing. This slide shows you just the top portion of that page that includes some graphical icons to link out to other resources. The page goes on from there to actually list resources and entries by subtopic, as well as some additional resources, resources that I'll talk about for a few moments here. So again, this page brings together a number of subtopics to give a broad overview. And these include links to all Ncpedia biographies of women, which is a growing collection, a special collection of governor spouses that we added a few years ago, historical overviews of women's life and roles in various eras, women's education and colleges, women in fields such as nursing and the military, as well as the struggle for suffrage. And landing pages like this in Ncpedia also include links to historical and primary source collections. This page includes numerous links to primary source collections in North Carolina, as well as an even longer list to primary source collections for women's history throughout the country. I consider these landing pages kind of a one-stop shop for exploring a topic. And whether you're a student doing homework, or you're a researcher, you're a family history researcher, you're a teacher looking for resources, or anybody just interested in learning, these pages really provide an open window to exploring a topic, to access secondary source content as well as primary sources. And I think that they're really valuable in the way they bring those two contexts together. The Ncpedia Women's History landing page also includes links to a few interactive features. And one of them is a new interactive timeline called Barrier Breaking Moments for North Carolina Women that we created for the Centennial of the Vote initiative called She Changed the World. And it also includes a women's history interactive quiz. And I've also included a women's history research guide developed by librarians here at the State Library. Again, this is kind of what I mean by a one-stop shop on a landing page, as just a portal for everything that you might need to sort of start wading into a topic in North Carolina history, in this case, women's history. The timeline was created using a free online resource called Timeline.js. This is produced by an organization called Night Lab at Northwestern University. And this app is phenomenal. It's been used by many institutions, students, research projects, as well as media outlets such as the New York Times. The Ncpedia Timeline showcases some important moments and firsts for North Carolina women, and it includes primary source images. Each timeline moment that's included has a brief paragraph describing the event. You can sort of see that on the sample title page that I included. All of the frames in this particular timeline include an historical image, and then a link out to the collection that came from, as well as a caption providing additional historical context and a credit. So it's really an attempt to create a learning hub around an historical topic that makes it interactive, highly contextual, and is a portal to primary sources. And another idea behind it is that timelines like this really support media and source literacy, especially for students, by including all of those touch points in a single interactive frame. These timelines are actually fairly easy to put together. I'm going to talk about it at the end. I've really personally sort of had a blast doing it, and it's very satisfying. Can be used in so many ways. The Women's History page also includes a research guide, as I mentioned. This covers a broad range of topics, from general historical resources, both online and print, resources for researching female ancestors, resources for children and youth, digital and online collections access points, and state documents relevant to women's history and government information. If you need one place to remember really to visit for help, just think State Library research guides. And again, all those resources are going to be included in the toolkit that I'll share with you at the end. And finally, I want to talk for a second about the quiz. This is a relatively new feature in Ncpedia, and it was designed by librarians over the last year and a half. And we created a women's history quiz for the launch of the centennial of suffrage, I guess about 18 months ago. And we previewed it at an in-person live event at the state capitol of North Carolina. And we had it on iPads, and we had lots of college students and teenagers coming to take the quiz. The quizzes are written generally at the 5th and 6th grade level, so they're accessible to a wide audience. This one was 10 questions and not for the faint of heart. And I think that just demonstrated how much work we have to do to really share the word and the stories of North Carolina women's history. It's a really hard quiz. So that was our pilot quiz. Since then, we've added 10 more. 4 of them have 5 questions, the rest have 10. Again, they're all written at an average grade level of grade 5. And each completed quiz produces a printer-friendly results page that includes a short paragraph of historical information as well as an image. So it's really kind of ready reference, ready reading for school-age children, or really anybody who wants to, you know, take a chance at demonstrating their knowledge on a topic of North Carolina history. So I encourage everyone to study up and take the quiz. And like Rosie says, you can do it. And I'd also be happy to share how we put that together if anybody's interested. We use the platform Drupal, and I would be glad to share how we created it. So blogs, and this is another question for you. Do you think that blogs can be a source for credible information? And I would like to say that there's the poll. Please let us know what you think about that, because I know there are a lot of varying opinions, and there's a variety of polls, or excuse me, of blog types. So it really varies. So please share your answers.
Kelly, we've been getting some great feedback about the use of Ncpedia, as well as some other resources that people use.
Okay.
Find a Grave was mentioned, ancestry.com. So a lot of great resources have been shared in the chat.
Great. Thanks, Whitney. Thank you. That's really valuable information. And please keep sharing that for us, because the more we know, 89% said yes, 11% said no. So I'm going to talk about that for a second. But again, you know, please keep sharing in the chat, because the information that you share with us about your interests, the resources that you use, the resources that you'd like to find but have had difficulty with, that helps us be better at our jobs and serve everyone better. So please keep sharing that. So the answer is yes and no. So everybody gets to be right with this one. Like any resource, I think it takes some discernment and vetting to decide about the quality and the credibility of blogs. But that said, they can be an excellent source of information. And I always include them in talks, because for me, they always stand out if they're good and they do what we'd like them to do for our work. They are an excellent resource. Excuse me. There are many historical institutions, libraries and archives, and other institutions that use their blogs not as opinion pieces, but as platforms to share history, collections, research tips, and other valuable information around a variety of topics. They're invaluable, I think, in this scenario for finding stories that bring meaning and context to events and documents. And so I'm going to talk a little more about that. And again, and they're very accessible, I think, to a wide variety of readers and interests. And again, this is another type of resource in our field, in our landscape of libraries and archives and museums, that is constantly changing. New blogs pop up all the time, even at institutions that already publish blogs, and many blog creators continuously change and update their blogs and focus. What that means is that as research sleuths, we have to continually rethink where and how we find these types of resources. It always reminds me of the Neil Young song, Rust Never Sleeps. Our work never sleeps. We're constantly looking for the same thing over and over again, because it's always different. So first, I'd like to start with blogs of the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. The department now has 12 blogs and several that focus specifically on history. These include North Carolina History Today, which is also known as This Day in North Carolina History. And this blog has a long train, probably more than 4 years of posts, and it's searchable across all posts. So it can be searched by keyword. For example, in preparing for this talk, I put in women to see how many blog posts that included women's history would come up. And I just started sort of perusing the list from there. The North Carolina History Today blog has also been organized topically for browsing, including specifically by women's history posts. And again, the links to all of these resources are going to be in the toolkit that I share at the end. So don't worry about capturing that link right now. Another blog from the State Archives covers North Carolina in World War I, and its newest blog, Stories of Service, and both, Stories of Service, covers the service stories of military veterans. And both of these include the voices and experiences of North Carolina's female service persons. Murder, Mayhem, and Mystery in the Old North State is also a newer blog, and it features a number of stories also related to North Carolina women. So next, I wanted to mention university and college history blogs. I think these are a profound source of information because this is where university special collections actually share some of the treasures and some of the unique stories from their manuscript and historical collections. So it's really a nice place to find that local history or North Carolina history, and it's often associated with an historical artifact, whether it's a photograph or it's a document or a book or some other artifact. And I think that this is just is so valuable because this is how we really learn about a lot of stories. Because you could search digital archives for days and you might not get that story curated for you. And so I think these blogs are tremendous. And this one comes from UNCG. And there are the stories of many women that attended the school that went on to do fabulous things that are contained in that resource. Additionally, and I think that another resource for women's history is local blog collections. And this is something that I think is starting to happen more and more. And, we hadn't seen this too much in the past, but again, the landscape is always changing. And when I sat down to get ready for this talk, I really started digging more deeply to look at some local history sites and history initiatives that had this kind of information to share. And I discovered a resource that I had not seen previously, and it's at the Marion Cheek Jackson Center for Community Justice in Chapel Hill. And this is just a phenomenally powerful website. They have a blog that shares local civil rights history and important people, including women, especially women from Chapel Hill and Orange County. So, I always encourage people to, really get beyond those first pages of search results in Google, because I really found this through searching Google, to get beyond that first page of search results and keep going until you find something that actually is relevant for you. And that's how I found this. I was just so delighted to see this, to learn about women and events in Chapel Hill that I live in Chapel Hill that I had never heard of before. So just circling back again for a second to the university collections, I think that again, it can't be overstated the value of looking at their blogs. For example, Wilson Library at UNC has developed a number of specialty historical blogs from the North Carolina collection and the Southern Historical Collection. In their blogs, they share North Carolina history and artifacts. North Carolina Miscellany is one of them, and then Southern Sources is another. They have a few others that are included in the resource. I cannot overstate how many historical artifacts that I have uncovered for our work here at the library, as well as the stories by looking at these blogs. Another excellent resource for blogs is your local county public library and their local history rooms. These are excellent resources for getting in touch with history at the local level. And there are a number of libraries around the state with blogs and history pages, including the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Public Library, which is shown here. Forsyth County Public Library has a site called Digital Forsyth, where they have shared numerous stories of Forsyth County history with digitized images from their collection. I visit that many times each year looking for information. And again, it's always good to remember this valuable resource and recognize that the landscape is always changing. And it's always worth searching for again, even if you looked for something 6 months ago and now maybe you're looking for it again or slightly differently, you just don't know what's going to be popping up online. Moving a little farther afield, at the national level, we don't have time to share everything, but just to give you a few of the ones that, you know, I think as librarians and archivists, we consider our go-tos. The Library of Congress is a must. The Library of Congress has a number of blogs, so there's really a lot there to mine. And again, it's a highly searchable database of blogs. They have it organized topically by the different blogs they've done over the years, but you can also search across them and find numerous posts related to women's history and related artifacts. The New York Public Library is another one that is one of my own personal go-tos. They have a vast collection, and I have also found resources related to North Carolina history digitized in their collections. So it really can't be overstated that, you know, you can cast a wide net to do this work. Finally, museums. There are many museums now that have really excellent blogs where they're doing exactly the same thing that, you know, I've sort of mentioned in these others, sharing stories with the historical artifacts, with items from their documentary collections, to really bring the context to the story. And here I included the National Women's History Museum. They have a growing complement of stories and news about their collections for women's history. It's a great resource, and from educator resources to biographies to stories they share on their blog, that's one that I wouldn't miss sharing if you were looking for a resource. Okay, next, the LAMs. And I know that some may think this is a funny term, but it stands for Libraries, Archives, and Museums. And I will say that across this wide range of institutions, during the last year, as many of us have been working from and learning from home, teaching from home, there has been a proliferation of resources for learning online, and this includes libraries, archives, and museums. And many institutions are increasingly providing learning content online, as well as creating virtual history exhibits, and where they bring the stories and the artifacts and the documents to life. And I think this is just wonderful ready-made content for learning and sharing in so many contexts. So close to home, we have the State Library of North Carolina and we have the State Archives of North Carolina. Both of our websites provide a rich variety of learning resources, from our blogs to access to our digital collections. And then we also have the North Carolina Museum of History, which has a large and growing online collection for distance learning, including podcasts, online exhibits, more materials for learning at home, and distance courses for education. I share that one widely, especially with teachers looking for information or people looking for information to use with children at home. Museums across the state and beyond. We have actually a number of museums. Excuse me, I was going to mention state historic sites first. North Carolina State Historic Sites website is also searchable, and you can go on the website and find information related to the histories of individual websites. I highly recommend that. That's also included in the resources at the end. And state historic sites also have a wealth of learning content that they've created for learning online and learning in the classroom. So please don't miss that. A little farther afield again, many museums around the country are increasingly putting content online. Some of my favorite go-tos are the myriad of Smithsonian museums. Most of their websites now have excellent search features, so you can easily put in a simple keyword and search, keyword search as simple as women, and see the results. And you'll just be amazed at what you might find. Be a little more granular in your keyword searching, and you know, you may find something that really suits what you're looking for. And I just wanted to circle back just a second for something that I meant to mention. In terms of museums around North Carolina, there are other museums that that I think that are now getting their collections online. The Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts in Winston-Salem, for example, has learning resources online, exhibits online. They make their collections available to search online. And that's really true for many, many more museums of sort of mid to larger size. So, you know, if your favorite museum is out there, see what they may have put online for you to learn about, and let us know what you find. The National Archives is another go-to. State libraries, archives, and historical societies. And this is where the collecting landscape for people not in the field can be a little confusing for researchers, because there's wide variety to state libraries, archives, and historical societies. In some states, historical societies are their heritage collecting institutions. In other states, for example, North Carolina, the state archives is our collector of record for state government records, governor's papers, other private manuscripts, county records, and the state library, by contrast, is the collector of state government publications. So this is all by way of saying that no two states are exactly alike. So if you're looking for information from another state, you know, be a little creative in your search. If you don't already know what the institution is that you're looking for. And in the resource that I included, I provided some links to lists of these institutions by state. So that work has at least partially been done for you. Finally, I wanted to share two others. The Smithsonian has a new page called Because of Her Story. And I really like this page. It provides a wealth of resources, stories, and objects from women who have helped shape the country from all areas of vocation and service. So that one is really worth looking at. And again, the National Archives has an excellent page devoted to Women's History Month. It links out to blog posts on history, as well as online exhibits, video and audio recording, records by historical era and topic, women's rights, and more. So that's another fabulous resource to have in your back pocket. And I know I'm giving you a lot of information. Just hoping again to draw kind of a wide net around what is out there for you. So I wanted to include research guides, because I think that these are really another important resource to have in your learning and research toolkit, no matter what your mission, your age, or your learning goal. Research guides, often created and curated by librarians and archivists, really provide a window into the range of resources and subtopics that are associated with a knowledge domain or a subject. They often include well-developed explanations, historical information, as well as images. They provide the expert's eye into how to dig deeper into both secondary and primary source content. And these are just a few of my favorites, curated for you to do some of the work, do some of the legwork for you. The State Library has created a Women in North Carolina Research Guide, and that is really a soup to nuts research guide that includes everything from primary sources to educator resources, state government documents, secondary learning content, and more. So it really is, again, one of those one-stop shops. And as I mentioned before, it's also in that Ncpedia Women's Collection page. So if you go there, you can find it. The State Library has also created a guide that we call #EverythingNorthCarolina, and it literally is everything North Carolina. It is a big door opened into researching all aspects of North Carolina history, state government information, legal history, and more. It also includes a tab for educator resources. So find that resource and check it out. The Library of Congress is a personal go-to, and they have a wonderful history research guide called American Women History Research Guide. The links are all here in my slides, again, in the resources. American Women's History Guide at the Smithsonian. That's another excellent resource for researching women's history. And full disclosure, whenever I'm researching a topic, especially a new topic, I go to these sites because I let them do some of the work for me. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's why we do this work. And blackpast.org, the African American History Encyclopedia that I mentioned, has some excellent research guides for researching African American history and African American women's history. That's one of my top line go-to resources. And then again, New York Public Library, highly trusted institution. They have an excellent research guide on women and gender studies, which has been invaluable for me on many occasions. Also, I wanted to share what this image is. This came from a circa 1950s Regulations for Women college guide from East Carolina University. And I located it again through the Digital Public Library of America site, but it is part of East Carolina University's digital collections. And I just loved finding that resource. Regulation for women's students. Okay, for the classroom. So moving along quickly, there are so many resources now being created for online learning, and I'm just going to share a few of them here, just to give you a little flavor for it. And they're all included in the resource guide, and there are many, many more that I've put in there. First, again, the Ncpedia page that I shared, and then on this slide, I shared a screenshot, from the Ncpedia Educator Resources page. And this is a page that's been curated for teachers, homeschoolers, really anybody looking for educational resources related primarily to North Carolina history. It includes links to a curriculum crosswalk tool that matches key aspects of the state's curriculum with curated Ncpedia content. It includes access to more than 20 entries that have been recorded for auditory learning. These are done on popular historical topics and state symbols. It also includes access to a new Ncpedia K-5 collection, which is a growing collection of more than 26 entries that are written at the 5th grade level. And this also includes 7 new biographies at the 5th grade level of important African American women in the state's women's history. It also includes some primary source activity pages, and one of them is called Social Game Changer, the Automobile, and it focuses on the role the automobile played in changing the lives of women. This page also includes links to Anchor, which is short for a North Carolina History Online resource. This is a digital history textbook that's geared toward 8th grade learning, 8th grade reading level and the curriculum. It includes historical and primary source content from topics ranging from the history of the area's first people on up to the 21st century. Pages include secondary learning content, primary source transcriptions and original images, access to supplemental learning material, audio and video recordings. We've added a number of important additions recently for North Carolina women's history. And I encourage you to look at those for learners of all ages. One of them is the Women of Bennett College, Unsung Heroes of the Civil Rights Movement. And another is Alone But Not Afraid, Sarah Keyes versus the Carolina Coach Company. And finally, Polly Murray and the History of 20th Century Freedom Movements. Next, kind of moving along, the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources has created a wonderful page for the Women's History Initiative, and it has a searchable database of learning resources across departmental websites, and I highly recommend, visiting that. And finally, again, I shared the educators and students page from the National Women's History Museum, because it has a wealth of just really fine resources for women's history. And you can also search that, see what you might come up with for North Carolina as well. So I know we're getting close to our time here, and I've just got a couple more things to talk to you about. Primary sources. This is especially for people doing historical research and teachers interested in working with primary sources. And here's where we are. And this is where we can also get seriously into the weeds. There are literally thousands of primary source collections across the country. And as librarians and archivists, we continually learn what topical and documentary collections exist and where. Collecting missions change, but also exposure of items and collections is ongoing. So there's always something new and different that we find. And just because you were looking for something a year ago, you may suddenly find it now online where you couldn't before. So that's always important to remember, that the landscape is just constantly changing. And now many of these websites have highly searchable websites and databases. So it's really, I don't miss some of these. And I'm going to share a couple that are really, I would say, some of our go-tos here at the library. First of all, the North Carolina Digital Collections. This is a project of the State Library and State Archives where we have collaborated to get aspects of our respective collections online. The State Library shares primarily state publications and some other historical records that we have, and the State Archives shares primarily from its historical collections. These are, there are more than 100,000 items in the digital collection, so it's vast. Oops, sorry about that. So I just wanted to go back for a second, sorry, and talk about the digital collections again for a second. This has also been organized into a number of curated collections, which I think are, oops, sorry about that. Having problems with my mouse today. A number of collections that are just ripe for browsing, and there are a number specifically related to women's history. So I highly recommend checking out that page. And again, it'll be in the resources that I include at the end of this talk. The next one that we cannot say enough about is the North Carolina Digital Heritage Center. And this is a collaborative initiative that was formed to digitize and share local and county history. And it is a phenomenal website. It's a phenomenal database for researching North Carolina history. It includes yearbooks, local North Carolina newspapers, images, memorabilia such as scrapbooks and other memorabilia, city directories, and other audiovisual resources. It also includes a number of the state's historical African-American newspapers. And this is the one resource that we probably is probably our main go-to, and we can never say enough about it. Digital Public Library of America. So all is revealed. The Digital Public Library of America is an effort to aggregate digitized collections across many institutions in the country. And so the North Carolina Digital Heritage Center, Digital NC, is our hub for the Digital Public Library of America. And so that's why when I mentioned the resources that the images that I found through Digital Public Library of America that are also in our state library digital collections, or in ECU's digital collections, or UNC Greensboro's digital collections, it's because I searched through DPLA, found them there, and then went to that item in the digital collection for that institution. So it's an invaluable resource. They have primary source sets, they have exhibits. You can always search in the institution's website because they will always probably have more than what they share up to DPLA, but DPLA is a wonderful resource not to be missed. Library of Congress, again, digital collections, women's history, fabulous resource. And there are resources related to North Carolina in there as well. Again, UNC Greensboro, I like to share them because they were a women's college and they do have collections related to women's history, including their university archives. They have a Women in the Military collection. They have an oral history collection for women in the military. Apropos of oral history is the Southern Oral History Program at the UNC Center for the Study of the American South. Highly searchable database, and finding oral histories really provides windows into the lived experiences of so many people in their own voices, including women. So I highly recommend that, especially for educators, you know, to really find that resources to share life in people's own voices. And again, museum collections. I include the North Carolina Museum of History. They have a vast collection that they make searchable online so that you can see what artifacts they've created related to North Carolina history. You know, from a banjo shown here to quilts, textiles, the fine furniture of Thomas Day and others. And again, I share the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts just because I love their collection. And it's just an example of a medium-sized museum that's down the road. Many people may not know about it, and they have their collections online. So moving right along to leave a few minutes for questions, I wanted to talk about how I have gotten creative. And I've shared a few things throughout this talk, the timelines, the quiz feature that we created in Ncpedia in our Drupal database. You know, and all the tools that I've used are free and open source. I haven't paid for anything. And some of these tools do have paid access, but I have never done that. And in fact, the timeline tool is freely available. It's open source and it runs off the internet. And I will say that I'll be glad to talk to anybody offline who is interested in using it and share my experience. It's very simple to use. And once you get the hang of it, the sky's the limit and you just want to keep going. A couple of examples here are a Prezi that I actually created about 4 years ago for the formation of North Carolina's counties. And that takes us from the 1600s all the way up to the addition of our last counties circa 1911, 1664 to 1911. And it includes images of historical maps that show the development of the counties, also shows how people viewed, you know, the representation of the landscape at various historical periods. And I think Prezi is a great resource, and it has so many enhancements and features since I created that. The barrier breaking moments for North Carolina women flyer at the top was actually a trifold poster that I created for the launch of the centennial a year and a half ago. It was an in-person paper trifold. I made it in Canva, another free resource. And then the other two images are for the women's history timeline that I created, and that runs off a Google Sheet. And I want to just share that with you briefly. It's called Timeline.js. It runs off a Google Sheet. It is free. It's freely available. It's an open source tool. Once you get the hang of filling out the Google Sheet, you get a shareable link for your Google Sheet. You plug it in the Timeline.js website, and then you can see your timeline. And you can use it in the simplest way, and you can also make it highly customizable the more you learn about it. And it's a fabulous tool. Excuse me. This is kind of what it looks like in the Google Sheet. And you create a spreadsheet with your own content. And again, you publish your sheet to the web. You copy and paste the link into the box at timeline.nightlab.com. you get embed code or you share your link, and that is literally how the timelines, I think I have 4 of them that are published in Ncpedia. And I say voila and endless tinkering, because once you get started, the sky's the limit. And really it's so much fun. And you can create as many frames as you want. You could create a single frame and use that as a single source. There's just so many things that can be done with it. And I did actually forget to mention a few of the other ones. Adobe Spark is free. Canva is free. I use Adobe Spark routinely for presentations, for creating collages. It's very user-friendly, and unlike every other Adobe product, it's intuitive. So I highly recommend that as well. And then just searching out there for other free tools. Finally, if you need research help, don't be a stranger. Please let us know. We're here to help you. We welcome your questions. You can get us at the State Library by email. And you can also get us on Ncpedia by live chat, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we would love to hear from you. So, questions? I know we have just about 6 minutes left.
So
I went over time just a little bit.
Oh, it's great. Thank you so much
Okay,
for sharing
sure.
so many great resources. We did have a question in the chat.
Okay.
Kelly, do you have any advice to share about copyright concerns when using images in digital storytelling platforms like the Timeline JS you mentioned?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that question. That's always at the top of my mind. I have become a self-styled copyright nerd, and I am very respectful of copyright law, and I know that there are wide misinterpretations. And so what I tend to do is I tend to rely on images that are either in the public domain, or the collections so state that that item can be used for research and educational purposes, for non-commercial purposes. I really look explicitly for that. And if I can't find that, then I move on. Because I do believe that copyright fair use still doesn't allow us to republish on the web without permission if something is under copyright. And so because we're republishing for the world to see, I actually do have a strict interpretation of that. On occasion, I do request permission from collections, and in the Women's History Timeline, there is an image, and I am now blanking on her name. She went to Oberlin, and I actually did get permission from Oberlin University Archives to republish that image. It's an image that's widely published all over the web, but their collection statement specifically says with permission only. And so I respect that. And I think that I've always operated under the assumption that that makes us really good stewards of the environment and the information that we live in. And it helps us make good friends with other collections, and, and just to ask. And I don't think anyone's ever said no. So, when we explain that it really is for educational purposes. So that's a long answer. But that's my kind of modus operandi. And I'd be delighted to talk to anybody more at length about copyright and how our understanding has been used in Ncpedia and for these other resources, because I have to really think about it every day. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Kelly.
Yep.
We've also had a lot of participants in the chat talk about different opportunities to get involved. So we had plugs for the Library of Congress's transcription project by the people, as well as the State Archives' Transcribe NC, History Hub at National Archives. So lots of opportunities for people who are interested to be interactive with these history projects too.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had our own good success last year with the Women's Oral History Transcription Project. And I'll actually go ahead and share that in the resources that I share so that you can see what we did with that. We partnered with the State Archives to transcribe audio and video oral histories of women veterans that were related to North Carolina. And I think we ended up doing about, I don't know, 25 or 30 of them, and that was widely successful. So I'd love to talk about that and share that. And also just a shout out, if there are any history researchers in the audience and you are ever interested in contributing to Ncpedia, there is always much needed content, particularly women's history, as we're discussing today, biographies. And so we would love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Kelly. We're coming up on time. It's now 10 o'clock. So I understand that we have a link to complete a survey and evaluation.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes. And let me do that. Thank you. You're keeping me honest, Whitney. Access today's resources. You can click on this link and to access, and you can also email me and connect with me, and I will share all kinds of resources with you if you miss something. And also click here, and I think they put the link for feedback in the chat. And really, we would love your feedback today for how I did, how we did, but especially how I did, what you liked, what was confusing, what you'd like to see more of, what we can do better. Please let us know. We appreciate that feedback. And I really appreciate everybody taking their hour.
Thanks so much, Kelly. So many fantastic resources. We really appreciate your time. All right, everyone, have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.